January 2023. Eastern Ukraine. A Ukrainian mechanized unit is holding a defensive line against a Russian infantry assault, supported by armored vehicles. Through the frozen mud and artillery smoke, a six-wheeled armored carrier moves forward, evacuating wounded soldiers from a position under direct fire. The vehicle takes 2 hits from 14.5mm heavy machine gun rounds on its starboard side. The rounds do not penetrate. The vehicle extracts its casualties, reaches a medical point, and returns to the line within the hour. The vehicle is not American. It is not British. It is not even Australian or Canadian. It was built in a factory in Hämeenlinna, Finland. Its designation is the Sisu XA-185. Its crews call it the Pasi, and it was designed in the early 1980s specifically to fight Russian forces in exactly the kind of frozen, forested terrain where Ukrainian soldiers are dying today. To understand why a Finnish armored carrier ended up in Ukraine fighting the war it was built to prevent, you need to understand Finland's strategic position during the Cold War. Finland shared an 1,340-kilometer border with the Soviet Union. Not a theoretical border, a real one, tested in the Winter War of 1939 to 1940 when the Soviet Union invaded and discovered that Finnish soldiers in Finnish terrain were among the most lethal defensive fighters in the world. Finland lost territory in that war. It did not lose its military independence or its will to fight. The lesson Finland drew from the Winter War was permanent. The Soviet Union was not a neighbor to be trusted. It was a neighbor to be prepared for. Finnish military doctrine was built entirely around one scenario: a Soviet invasion from the east. Armored columns crossing the border at multiple points simultaneously, pushing through the forests and frozen lakes of Karelia and Lapland toward the population centers of the south. Finland's response was a concept called total defense. Every able-bodied citizen had a military role. The terrain itself was weaponized. Road networks, bridge capacities, and forest tracks were all planned as defensive obstacles. And the army needed vehicles that could operate in that terrain, not the open plains of Central Europe where NATO doctrine assumed Soviet armor would roll. The forests and frozen lakes and narrow roads of Finnish Lapland, where a wheeled vehicle that could carry infantry, survive small arms and heavy machine gun fire, cross frozen lake surfaces without breaking through, and operate at -40°C was worth more than a tracked fighting vehicle that required heated maintenance facilities and tank transporters to redeploy. In 1972, the Finnish Defense Forces issued a requirement for a new armored personnel carrier. The existing vehicles, aging American M13 series, were adequate for Central European conditions. They were inadequate for Finnish conditions. Tracks iced over in extreme cold. The vehicles required constant maintenance in temperatures where metal became brittle and hydraulic fluid thickened to paste. Finland needed something designed from the beginning for Arctic conditions. The contract went to Sisu Auto, a Finnish commercial truck manufacturer whose primary business was building heavy vehicles for Finnish forestry and construction industries. Vehicles designed to operate in -40° winters across terrain that destroyed imported equipment. Sisu brought that knowledge to military vehicle design. The vehicle that emerged from the Sisu design process in 1983 was the XA-180, later upgraded to the XA-185. 6 wheels on 3 axles, a boxy angular hull of welded steel, 8mm on the sides and rear, 10mm across the frontal arc. Combat weight was 15,000 kilograms. Power came from a Valmet 612 DSBR turbocharged diesel producing 236 horsepower. Maximum road speed was 100 kilometers per hour. Cross-country speed was 60 kilometers per hour. Range was 800 kilometers. The vehicle was fully amphibious, without preparation. It entered water and swam using wheel rotation, crossing rivers, fjords, and partially frozen lake surfaces that tracked vehicles could not negotiate. The heating system was a separate die-cell-fired unit independent of the main engine, capable of maintaining crew compartment temperature at -40° external temperature. The engine itself was designed for cold start capability at -40 without preheating. Every seal, every lubricant, every hydraulic fluid was specified for Arctic operation. The crew compartment carried 10 soldiers plus a crew of 2. The roof mounted a weapon station for a 12.7mm heavy machine gun, or 40mm automatic grenade launcher. Later variants added applique armor packages rated to defeat 14.5mm heavy machine gun rounds across the frontal arc and sides. The vehicle's most significant tactical feature was its ability to operate on Finnish lake ice. The XA-185 distributed its 15-ton weight across 6 wheels in a configuration that allowed movement across ice surfaces capable of supporting approximately 25 centimeters of thickness. In Finnish winter, lakes froze to depths exceeding 60 centimeters. The XA-185 could use Finland's lake network as a road system invisible to Soviet satellite surveillance and inaccessible to heavier tracked vehicles. Soviet planners had no effective counter to an army that could move its infantry across terrain that appeared on maps as obstacles. Finland ordered 300 XA-180 and XA-185 vehicles between 1983. The vehicles became the backbone of Finnish mechanized infantry, distributed across brigades defending every potential Soviet approach route. Crews trained in conditions that most NATO forces never experienced: night operations at -35 degrees, river crossings in partial ice-over conditions, navigation through pine forest so dense that vehicle headlights were visible for 20 meters. The XA-185 performed in those conditions without modification, without special equipment, without the heated shelters that other armies required. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. The threat Finland had designed the XA-185 to counter disappeared overnight. The vehicles were well-maintained, partially updated, and increasingly surplus to a reduced threat environment. When Finland joined NATO in April 2023, the process of rationalizing its equipment had already begun. Older XA-180 and XA-185 vehicles were identified for transfer. Ukraine was the destination. The first Finnish XA-185 vehicles arrived in Ukraine in 2023. Ukrainian forces received them without the months of training that typically accompanied Western vehicle transfers. Finnish instructors had spent 40 years training crews for Arctic conditions. Ukrainian winter conditions were broadly similar. The vehicle was familiar to operate. The diesel heater worked in Ukrainian winters the same way it worked in Finnish ones. The amphibious capability proved immediately useful on the Dnipro River and its tributaries. The 14.5mm protection held against the Russian 14.5mm KPV heavy machine gun mounted on BTR-60 and BTR-70 armored personnel carriers. That specific protection level was not accidental. The XA-185 had been designed to survive the weapons that Soviet infantry carriers mounted, because Finnish planners had always assumed they would fight vehicles exactly like those. The vehicle Ukraine was now fighting against was the vehicle that the XA-100 had been designed to fight 40 years earlier, in a different country, against a different name for the same army. Ukrainian crews noted several operational advantages that distinguished the XA-185 from American M113s and other APCs they operated. The heating system allowed crews to remain inside for extended periods in winter without the vehicle running its main engine, reducing thermal and acoustic signature. The amphibious capability allowed river crossing operations without engineer bridge support. The six-wheel configuration provided greater cross-country stability than four-wheeled vehicles in deep mud. And the vehicle was simple, mechanically straightforward, repairable, with tools carried on board. A crew that had trained on the XA-185 for 2 weeks could perform all routine maintenance without depot support. In the resource-constrained environment of the Ukrainian front, mechanical simplicity was a tactical advantage. By late 2023, Finnish XA-185 vehicles were operating in multiple Ukrainian brigades across the eastern and southern fronts. Finland did not publish transfer numbers, consistent with its policy of not providing detailed breakdowns of military aid. Estimates suggested between 80 and 120 vehicles had been delivered by early 2024. The XA-185 was not the most capable vehicle Ukraine operated. The Bradley fighting vehicle had a more powerful gun. The Leopard 2 tank had more armor. But the XA-185 could go where those vehicles could not, across frozen rivers in January, through forest tracks too narrow for Bradleys, across lake ice that would not support a Leopard. In a war fought across the full complexity of Ukrainian terrain in all 4 seasons, a vehicle that could operate everywhere was worth more than a vehicle that could defeat any opponent but only on the right ground. Finland had understood this for 50 years. That understanding was now protecting Ukrainian soldiers in the forests of Donetsk and the river crossings of Zaporizhzhia. The vehicle that was designed to prevent a Russian invasion of Finland was being used to resist a Russian invasion of Ukraine. The threat was the same. The doctrine was the same. The vehicle worked the same way it had always worked, because the enemy it was built to fight had never changed. Only the border had moved.